Union mission in Somalia was initially deployed in 2007 to help bring stability to the war-torn capital of Mogadishu. And since then, over the years, the mission has increased, has received increasing support, and I think everyone will agree is increasingly playing quite a key role in Somalia, and is likely to continue to have an impact on the future of Somalia. Now, with this in mind, our research has actually found that despite the significant support given to Amisom, because it has been credited with having helped move al-Shabaab out of Mogadishu and out of other key towns in south-central Somalia, certain Amisom soldiers have also abused the power and the support they have been granted. Now, in this report, what we find is that certain Amisom soldiers from the Ugandan and Burundian forces in Mogadishu over the last year have been abusing their power to sexually exploit, which is basically the use of power, the abuse of vulnerability for sexual favors, but have also sexually abused, raped women and girls on two of their main bases in Mogadishu. Now, what we find is that, so this research is based primarily on interviews with survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse, although, as I will describe later, we have also focused our research on what are troop contributing countries, in this case Uganda and Burundi, who obviously have jurisdiction over their forces, who are the main responsible for misconduct by their forces. What have they been doing specifically on this issue? What we find is that there are a range of tactics which have been used by the Amisom soldiers in Somalia to lure in and coerce women and girls. One of the most alarming findings in this report is how much Amisom soldiers have actually used humanitarian assistance, and particularly medical assistance, to lure in women and girls. So what we found was that actually when women and girls are going on to the outpatient departments on two of the main bases in Mogadishu, and this is particularly the case, I would say, on the Burundian contingent base, they go in to get medication, and it's when they are approached by a Somali intermediary who claims to be a translator for Amisom and are told, you can get your medication if you come back to the base. And when they go back to the base, it's when they realize what is actually going to be expected of them. And one of the most, shocking testimonies in this report was a woman who actually was told, come back to the base to get your medication, and suddenly realized once she found herself in the room of an Amisom soldier, she suddenly realized that she was going to be expected to have sex with this soldier. And she said to us, at that point, I wanted to run. I was terrified, but I remembered one of the reasons which had brought me here was my hunger and my need to survive. And so she felt forced to stay in that room and have sex with this soldier. We have not only documented sexual exploitation, we have also documented rape. And similarly, what we see, it's women and girls coming into the base to get medication. They're told to follow soldiers into a more secluded part of the bases, and this is where we've documented the cases of rape. In terms of the exploitation, now we cannot come to conclusions in terms of the prevalence, how widespread this is. But I think there are many findings in this report which would suggest not only that this is organized, but also that this is not secret. Now, why I say this are several factors. First of all, it's the way in which it's happening. The Somali intermediaries which are approaching women and girls, either in the medical centers. In certain cases, women and girls were actually approached in their internally displaced people's camps. Now, one thing which is very important to stress is all the women and girls we have spoken to in this report were from displaced communities. So once again, highlighting the incredible vulnerability of these women to the soldiers and to the abuses. Then the women and girls are coming in through official gates. So they're coming into what are supposedly protected bases, and they are coming in through official gates where there are Amisom soldiers. The sexual exploitation which we document in this report is happening also in Amisom facilities. So in the tents which are on the bases for the soldiers, but also in more standalone structures of higher ranking officials or soldiers. There are several types of exploitation. So the majority of women and girls we spoke to actually described having sex for money or for food or for medication with one soldier or official for prolonged periods of times. Others are having sex with several soldiers within one day and are coming in and out of the bases. It doesn't stop there, though. The abuses also carry on and take more forms. Several of the women and girls we spoke to described being beaten and slapped, often when they were refusing or reluctant to carry out certain forms of sexual activities by the soldiers. Some of the soldiers also refused to wear condoms, and so several of the women we spoke to had actually caught sexually transmitted illnesses as a result. And in the Somali context, where access to medical care is still very limited, this was also highlighting once again the long-term impact that these abuses are having on these already incredibly vulnerable populations. One of the elements which is also important to underline is how powerless the women actually felt. And this came out in particular when we were asking them whether they had filed complaints, whether they had spoken out to anyone about what was happening to them, either for the specific cases of rape or for the cases of exploitation. And with two exceptions, none of the women we spoke to, all the girls, have filed a complaint, and they expressed a real fear of reprisals from the perpetrators, so the Amisom soldiers themselves, from their families. One of the girls we spoke to actually, once her father found out how she was surviving, he kicked her out of the home. So also this real stigma in the community. But also one of the findings which I was not expecting, but which came across very much, was the real fear of reprisals from the main armed insurgent group Al-Shabaab, which has often targeted individuals who are seen as engaging or working with the enemy. And obviously these women and girls have been going onto the basis in the cases of exploitation. So I think this is very important to highlight in terms of the need for creating an environment where those who might want to come forward feel they can do. And why I stress this is actually the few cases which have, over the last year, spoken out. Now, there was one case last year which we also document in this report, which was allegations of gang rape by Ugandan soldiers on the Masla base, which is another base in Mogadishu where the Ugandan soldiers are based. The response, both by the Somali government but also by the Amisom headquarters, was very unsatisfactory, both in terms of, focusing in terms on the Amisom response. Initially, they were relying on the Somali government to carry out an investigation, but as we know, the Somali government does not have jurisdiction over these forces. It is up to troop contributing countries to hold their forces to account for crimes they are committing. So first of all, questionable why there was a reliance on the Somali government to carry out this investigation in the first place, but when Amisom did set up a board of inquiry, they did not carry out the sort of investigation which would be needed in these sorts of very, very serious allegations. So they relied primarily on the logbook of the camp where this allegedly had happened, interviewing soldiers. But I think if Amisom really is committed to responding positively and proactively to allegations, they are going to need to put in place investigative teams which have the capacity to do these sorts of investigations. They need to make sure that they are interviewing eyewitnesses, survivors, if the survivors are willing to speak out, and not just relying on official Amisom soldiers for a view on the issue. In terms of what is being done at the moment, I would say that the response is mixed so far. In some ways, at the level of the troop contributing countries, they are deploying resources to Somalia to investigate misconduct by their forces. And so they are deploying legal advisors. Uganda, in a very positive move, actually had a military court in Mogadishu for a whole year, from late 2012 to late 2013. And I think, you know, this is definitely a good practice which needs to be replicated by all the troop contributing countries. Unfortunately, Uganda has since called that court back to Kampala. And I think in terms of access of witnesses to court hearings, but also in terms of victims of all abuses feeling that justice is actually being done, having these courts sitting in Mogadishu or in other parts of Somalia is really very important. However, what I would say, and what we found, we went to Uganda and Burundi to meet with military court personnel and other military personnel in both countries, is that these resources haven't really been deployed to focus on sexual exploitation and abuse. And so why I say that is basically there have been a very limited number of board of inquiries into either sexual exploitation allegations or cases of abuse. There is actually only one case that we have identified, which is currently pending before the Ugandan court in Kampala, which is the case of a 12-year-old girl who was raped by a Ugandan soldier in the outskirts of Baidoa in May last year. Now, this case has been pending since then, and unfortunately, this happened at the time when the military court was brought back to Uganda. So once again, I think diminishing the chances that actually the young girl will ever see justice for her abuse. In terms of Amisom and the African Union, I mean, Amisom for a long time was denying that this was an issue or a problem. Over the last year, we have seen a change in attitude, and particularly Amisom has drafted a policy on sexual exploitation and abuse. In the report, we make some recommendations on how the policy needs to be reviewed and strengthened. And now we need to see, you know, the policy adopted, because it still hasn't been. But that's definitely a positive sign and a step in the right direction. What we do need to see from Amisom is both efforts to establish complaints mechanisms. When I would ask legal officers, where would a survivor, if she decided to complain, where would she go right now? And they would say to us, well, they can just go onto the bases. But given that the abuses are happening on these bases, it's very unlikely that women or girls are going to be willing to come forward to the basis. And so I think Amisom with the UN needs to discuss what are the best channels to really ensure that those who do want to speak out about this are able to come forward, but at the same time that there are no reprisals against women and girls, or even whistleblowers. Even within Amisom, individuals who do start coming forward and speaking out about this need to be protected. And I think really creating a positive environment is critical to actually this starting to be dealt with more significantly. At the level of the African Union, we were actually in Addis last week to share an advanced copy of the report. I think there is an opportunity here. I mean, in the end, AU peace support operations are relatively new, and in some ways they actually have an opportunity to get things right early on. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the very grave mistakes of the United Nations. And so little by little, the United Nations has been forced to put in place some good institutional mechanisms to deal with sexual exploitation and abuse much more systematically. And I think the AU actually has the chance to now put those in place. And so it is positive to see that there has been a recent effort to build up a conduct and discipline facility. So individuals who should be more systematically raising awareness of these questions among troops on the ground, that needs to be reinforced. We would also like to see the AU actually establish an independent investigation unit. Now, what that would do is that when troop contributing countries don't take allegations seriously and don't investigate allegations, well, then the AU is under the memorandums of understanding signed between the troop contributing countries and the AU. The AU is supposed to step in and investigate. The problem is right now they have nothing to step in with. And so as soon as possible, establishing that capacity at the Addis level would be very important. I think I will leave it there and open up to questions, which I hope and I'm sure there are many of.